Hi guys, welcome to Memo's Tutorials. Today we are looking at a new topic which is ecology, and our syllabus requires us to know what an ecosystem is, a community, population, species, niche, and a habitat. We should be able to define those terms. We are also required to know the energy flows in an ecosystem, which includes food chains, trophic levels, food webs, and the ecological pyramids, as well as the nutrient cycles. The nutrient cycles, they include carbon dioxide, the carbon dioxide cycle, and the nitrogen cycle. So lastly, we are going to look at the human activities on the ecosystem, which include pollution, deforestation, desertification, and conservation, together with biodiversity and populations. So now, starting with an ecosystem, we're just looking at the interaction between living and non-living organisms on a particular environment. Environments, they are not the same. We've got water environment, the aquatic environment, we've got environment on land, environment on snow. So we can have different environments. We have a game park, we have pond. So when we're talking of an ecosystem, we're just looking at the relationship between the living and non-living things and how they interact with each other. And now when we move on to a community, we are saying that a community, it is a population, it's a group of populations found in the same area and interact with each other. Now moving on to the population, we are saying a population is just a group of organisms of the same species living in the same area at the same time. Remember, I said these definitions, you really need to know them. So you better cram them and make sure you memorize them. Moving on to a species, this is just a group of living things that have got similar features and they can interbreed to produce fertile offsprings. And then we have an habitat, which is the exact place where an organism lives. We have organisms that live in water, for example, fish. You will never find fish in a mountain, right? We've got organisms that live in terrestrial habitats, which simply refers to land, right? And now moving on to a niche. So this is the specific role a given organism play in an ecosystem. For example, we've got organisms that we say these ones are producers. We have organisms that we say they are consumers. They can either be primary, secondary, tertiary consumers. And we also have organisms that we call decomposers. And these ones that are usually last in the energy levels. Now let's move on to energy flows in an ecosystem. So first of all, you need to understand that the energy that we're talking about, the source of energy is the sun. So we have the solar energy that comes from the sun, and this solar energy gets to us through plants. The plants are the ones that are able to convert the solar energy into chemical energy that can be used by living organisms. And how do plants do that? They do it during or through the process of photosynthesis. During photosynthesis, that's when they change the solar energy into chemical energy that can be used by living organisms. So the plants, they are our producers. And then we've got animals that feed on plants only. We call them the primary consumers. And they've got a special name, which is herbivores, right? Herbivores, they only feed on plants. They only feed on primary on the producers, right? And we've got secondary consumers. These ones, they feed on primary consumers. These ones, they feed on primary consumers. For example, I can have a lion eating a sheep, and a sheep eat grass. So a sheep, it's actually a what? A primary consumer. We have got tertiary consumers. For example, an eagle or a vulture can feed on a secondary consumer. That's making them to be tertiary consumers, right? So with that being said, we are now moving on to what we call food chains. So what we need to take note of is that at the beginning of each food chain, we'll always have a producer. We'll always have, and the main purpose of a producer is to convert the sun's energy into usable chemical energy that can be used by the living organisms, right? So at the beginning of each food chain, we have a producer, and you need to be able to define a food chain where we say it is just a sequence of feeding relationships. And this feeding relationship will always start with a producer, right? We have a very good example there. We have cabbage, and cabbage, it's a plant and it's a producer there. The cabbage is being eaten by a rabbit, and a rabbit will be eaten by a man. A man will also be eaten by a lion. So this is just showing us a feeding relationship in an ecosystem. It's just a single one. So you must take note, food chains, they only show a single feeding relationship between living organisms in an ecosystem, right? So we'll leave it here for today. On our next class, we are going to be looking at food webs and the pyramids.